Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm really excited to welcome to the show sports psychologist Dr. Kristoffer Henriksen. Kristoffer, great to have you on.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's so super cool to have you on. We've been talking about doing this for some time and I'm really excited to talk to you about your sports psychology career and all things Team Denmark. But why don't we get started by you introducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Sure, I would love to do that. My name is Kristoffer Henriksen. I am a professor at the University of Southern Denmark, which is sort of right in the middle of Denmark. And then I've also been a sports psychologist with Team Denmark since 2008, I believe.
And I know you have a rich sporting background. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about your own sort of personal development within the domain of sports psychology. But I know you have a rich sporting background. I think you played all sports as a youngster.
Yeah, I did. I had a hard time choosing what to do, but I mean, I believe that's just a really healthy and good approach to youth sport, right? And I mean, to try a lot of different things. I ended up in a bit of swimming and triathlon, but not on any sort of what I would see as an elite level. I definitely wasn't there.
No winter sports?
No winter sports. That's not big in Denmark, although we have just sent the biggest team ever to the Winter Olympics in Danish history, I believe. I think it was the qualification of our two ice hockey teams, men and women, that sort of made the number go up beyond what we're used to.
Oh, wow. Have you worked on that side of things yet, the winter sports side, or not so much?
Not me personally, no, but definitely Team Denmark has made an effort, to promote this sport as well. But it's difficult in the sense that we don't really have the tradition and the culture, and it's not a natural place for young kids to go when they first enter sports.
My assumption is football is the national sport.
Football is the biggest sport in Denmark by far. Also, what we call team handball is a very big sport, but we have quite a few. I think we have a fairly active sort of young generation but like many other countries, we also experience quite a bit of dropout once they get into that sort of party age and school is getting busy and all that stuff.
We certainly know about that, but just briefly on Danish football, Danish soccer, you guys have become sneaky good over the last few years, haven't you? I mean, it was a great game against England in the Euros over the summer. We just about edged you in the end, but it was a fantastic game. But wow, I mean, you beat us at Wembley. I think it was it 2 or 3-1 prior to that in a friendly, and climbed up the world rankings. What a team you guys are now.
Yeah, I think we're in a good streak right at the moment, and I think it was what the doctor ordered this summer or last summer. I mean, we came out of COVID, slowly sort of lifting the restrictions, and we needed that boost as a nation, and I think our national team just delivered. It's a fantastic summer with a lot of sort of good emotions, and as you may know, I mean, we had this incident with Christian Eriksen in the start of the tournament where he it was a terrible sort of accident but really in hindsight it sort of brought the team and even the nation together. I mean, I think we backed our team more than ever before, and I just felt as an innocent bystander that it was a fantastic summer.
Well, I mean, the wonderful news is, I mean, as we're speaking today, I'm assuming Christian Eriksen is probably entering his new West London abode because he's just signed for Brentford under Thomas Frank. The Brentford manager is Danish, is he not?
He is Thomas Frank.
Yeah. Yeah. So West London is red.
The Vikings are coming.
Indeed. No, it's just so wonderful to see him getting an opportunity to resurrect his career, isn't it? Because it was just, I was watching the TV, I was watching it at a time, it's just horrendous, and just so thankful that he's back. I mean, he's alive first and foremost, and then just incredible to see him back playing.
Absolutely. I think we all are already relieved and happy to experience this, and I think his teammates most of all, of course, and his coach. And I think it was again, I mean, to witness the way the team came together this summer was touched my feelings. So that was very nice.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
just fantastic. Now, I'm really excited to speak to you today because we're going to break a couple of things down. You've written a paper with a couple of colleagues on the structure, the process that you have within Team Denmark, the sports psychology side of things. You've shared it with the world, which I just think is so charitable and giving. Given how successful you guys are being right now, just demonstrates how good you are. That you can just go, here you go, everybody. Have what we're doing. We'll crack on and continue to improve it. So I'm super excited to unpack a paper that you've written with your colleagues there. But perhaps we can start with your own consultancy practice as a sports psychologist, which obviously is delivered within Team Denmark. But you sent me a chapter from a book that I don't believe has been released yet, and it's on expertise. And it's just fascinating. It breaks down your journey as a sports psychologist and what you do and how you go about being a sports psychology consultant and why you do what you do. And so I would like to break that down a little bit, because you are regarded as, I'm going to deeply embarrass you here, Kristoffer, and so you are regarded as one of the preeminent sports psychs in Europe by myself and all my colleagues, and that's why it's so exciting to have you on. But let's begin at the beginning. Why sports psychology? What got you into that in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think as a young athlete, I found that side of things was really interesting, and I didn't manage it all that well. And looking back at what I know now, I think that there's a lot of things I did wrong that I would have liked to have done differently, anyways. But I didn't know at the time. But I was always fascinated with the way things were and with how I could always sort of personally be good in training, but not always get it out when it was competition time. And I guess that's a very normal story, right? And I've just been one of those. I think when I then started to study psychology, I think I knew almost from the beginning that I wanted to end up in sports psychology somehow. I didn't know if it was even possible or if that was even a position you could get. It wasn't in Denmark at the time. There was no sports psych education or anything like that. So I just studied psychology, but every time I had any course, I would sort of try and twist it and turn it to relate to sport. And I think my teachers, my professors, sometimes they were like annoyed by by how I always managed to make everything about sport, no matter what task they gave me. But but I've always found that very interesting, and I think it also comes back to how mainstream psychology is mainly concerned with helping people who are sort of below normal functioning level to get up to a normal, decent functioning level. And there is that corner of psychology that's concerned with sort of the next thing. I mean, people who are already beyond normal performance level, how do you get those to really, really excel? And I've just been fascinated by that always.
I do have to ask you, of course, because everything you're talking about resonates with me and my golf career. If you could get in a time machine and go back, what would be one thing that you would tell your younger self to do or to strive to embody and enact that may have helped whether it's your enjoyment of the sports you were competing in, or your learning or your performance?
I could make like a long list, but I think
So could I. So could I.
maybe the most important one would be to actually trust the people around me. So
Okay.
I remember one of the things that I did really bad was when we had a tapering period, like we were meant to be training less hard because it was, a competition coming up, and I would just go out and do extra training in different disciplines. So I would, as a swimmer, I would start cycling or running hard, or I would do more strength training, and because I had that sort of um, I guess it's a blend of sort of a perfectionist and then sort of never enough kind of mentality. You always have to train harder, and you don't always have to. So I think I didn't let the people around me help me enough.
So utilizing your social supports more effectively, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. No, fascinating. Now, as a sports psychologist, you will, like all sports psychologists do, you will have a certain approach in terms of your consultancy. So it would be really fascinating to hear what your, in summary, if I may ask, what your approach is and what has shaped your approach to consultancy.
Yeah, I mean, before you mentioned that that chapter that I've been writing, I was lucky enough that Mark Aoyagi and Arthur Poksvedovsky invited me to contribute a chapter to a book called Expert Approaches in Sports
Yeah.
Psychology, and believe it's coming out this spring. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. And it was quite fun actually for me to sit down and they sort of challenged me with the structure. So they asked me like, what is your sort of theory of performance, and what is your theory of performance breakdowns, and how do you go about your daily work as a sports psych? And it was quite challenging, you know, as a practitioner. You sometimes work from a more sort of tacit knowledge kind of place, and then you sit down and try to really think about what is actually you know, what shapes my approach. But I came up with this idea that athletes have to be all in, and I sort of developed this like small sort of personal theory about six
Mm.
types of being in, and they're called in the moment, in acceptance of the unpleasant, in pursuit of values, in balance, in love with their sport, and in a good sporting environment. And we can maybe come back to some of it, but it's very much inspired by ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which is a big sort of inspirational source for me, and also the holistic ecological approach, which I've been part of developing in my research, which sort of brings attention to the environment that athletes are in. And I truly believe that it's not enough for us as sports psychs to help athletes cope with issues in their environment. We need to actually sometimes improve the environments, because I believe the environments are so crucial.
I love that notion of all in, obviously, but I love the way you're using that word in to start those six practices, if you like, in the moment, in acceptance of the unpleasant, in pursuit of values, in balance, in love with their sport, in a good sporting environment. And that is framed by the ACT approach, acceptance commitment therapy, and the holistic ecological approach, which we spoke to Niels Feddersen about the holistic ecological approach, which was absolutely fascinating. So, would you, on that basis, then, would you, when you're working with a team, when you're working with an organization, is that very much your first port of call, to observe the environment before you observe the individuals? Because ultimately, the behavior of the individuals, the challenges of the individuals are predominantly influenced by the environment.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the environment is made up of individuals. So you know, you can't sort of observe one without the other, and I suppose, at least not if you go out and look at their actual practice. But yeah, I mean, if I, for instance, am to work with a new sport, I like to you know, slow things down a bit and go out and observe what it is that they're doing, and try to be part of the environment for a while before I start doing sort of interventions. And I will observe individual athletes, how they behave, and I'll ask them loads of questions around their strengths and things that they would like to get out of it. But I will also observe the environment. I'll observe the way that coaches interact with each other, with athletes, how coaches and management interact with each other, the way that they use experts, what are sort of the underlying values of the way that they work in the environment, and all that. And I really try to not just I try to make that contract with with the key people in the environment, that if I see something that I want to bring up, I can come back and I can give them feedback, and I can sort of bring up issues not only related to athlete mentality, but related to the way the environment works.
So it's very much an observational role at the beginning. It's observing the athletes, it's observing the coaches, the relationships between the two.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's key when you sort of come into a new sport that you don't come in and believe you have all the right answers right from the beginning. You have to be a little bit humble, and curious and try and understand. I mean, I work in elite sport environments. These are good environments with good athletes, so they're doing something right. And I don't want to come in and just tell them to change a whole lot of things, right? So I want to try and understand what it is that they do right and what little tweaks and things we can change. But I think they know me in a way, and they know my research. That it's focused on environment, and so it's easy for me because they expect me to have a look at their environment and try and give some feedback in that respect as well. I know from colleagues who don't have that sort of background as a researcher in ecological psychology. I mean, for them sometimes what they can tell me is that it can feel like, let's say, coaches will. I feel that they're overstepping boundaries if they talk too much about things related to coaching or management, or organization. But for me, it's always been, I'd almost say, expected of me.
Holistic ecological approach. And you've mentioned the term ecological psychology. What does that mean to you? What do you mean by those terms?
Yeah, so ecological psychology is not one theory. I mean, it's a lot of different theories about perception and other things as well. The way we use it in the holistic ecological approach is that ecological psychology kind of states that to reduce anything more than individual in context is to be too reductionistic. So we can't just look at the athletes. We can't just take athletes out of their environment into my office and try and understand what it's all about without actually, understanding the athletes in their context. So we want to look at the environment, what is good and what is less good, how can we improve, and so forth. The holistic part means that it's not just the sporting environment. So when we look at environments, we look at them holistically. We try and understand how school and sport are connected to each other, how what kind of changes on an everyday basis that athletes go through. I mean, how do they manage the shift from school to sport, or the other way around in the morning, or I mean, what ways do parents support or not so much? Or I mean, we try and take a sort of a holistic look at the environment.
Is that the work of Bronfenbrenner?
Yeah, Bronfenbrenner did some of the very foundational work back in the 60s and 70s, right? And he was a child psychologist, and he had that same overall idea that if you want to understand why a child, this was in developmental psychology, so if you want to understand why a child is acting out or is, I mean, he wanted to leave the idea of diagnosing the kid and looking at the family and the environment and saying, well, sometimes there's perfectly good reasons in the environment why kids do what they do. Could be that their parents are undergoing a divorce. Could be that daddy is not thriving at the workplace or whatever. I mean, it's a complex reality, and this is one thing that Bronfenbrenner really shed a light on.
So, listening to what you're saying, for me, I'm thinking of the socio-cultural context within which players have grown up in. They're spending time in the familial influences, peer influences, the influence from their wider community. How are there specific ways you go about trapping this data? How do you know about these influences, or how do you get to know about these influences?
Yeah, I think it's a question of having that in the back of your mind all the time. So when
Okay.
I do sort of in normal athlete interviews in the beginning, what I like to do is I like to take them for a walk, and try and chat to them about their strengths and what they'd like to be better at and how they perceive their environment. But I remember to ask about the environment always. When I look at the way that things are organized, I always try to look not to look at the environment and the way things are structured and so forth. So when I talk to coaches, I'll try and talk to that. Sometimes I'll even phone a teacher, to get another opinion from another place. So it depends a little bit on the relationship that I have with the athlete. And the same goes when we try and do, let's call it interventions on an environment level. Those can be structural in nature. I mean, trying to bring people closer together. So sometimes I'll try and stimulate a better dialogue between the sport and the school, the coaches and the teachers, for example, by bringing them together and trying to plan. If you have athletes that feel that they are lost in the way that everything is always cramped together, and exams are always coinciding with with important competitions, and so somebody needs to try and help them structure that environment better. And I'll take upon me to do that sometimes. But it can also be about sort of more cultural issues. If I feel that there's a sort of a more vague culture, or that athletes lack sort of clarity and direction around the values that they're working from, and things like this, I might go about and do sort of interventions aimed at trying to discuss what type of team do we want to be, what are the values that we would like to work from, and so forth.
I'm almost hearing a three-pronged approach there. I'm hearing the conversations that you have with individuals to get to know them, where they've come from, their backgrounds, their cultural experiences. I'm hearing conversations with coaching staff, the potential to sit in with coaching staff when they're talking about specific players, for example, and potentially making sure that the conversation is steered towards understanding the experiences, or at least considering the experiences of the players in their socio-cultural context. And then the third one being the potential to engage in structural intervention in the broader environment. Though that it's kind of like a three-pronged approach almost.
Yeah, you can say that. What I'd comment on perhaps was, that when I talk to the athletes about the environment, we do talk about sort of what they come from, what is their, how did they develop, but it's a lot of it is also about the environment right now.
Of course.
How is your environment structured at this very moment? What are the different forces that direct you in one direction, and what are forces that act as barriers for you and enablers, and things like this. So trying to understand that the environment that the athletes are actually in at that very moment is very much a part of sort of my initial getting to know the environment.
Your 6 all-in theories of performance excellence, which I love, as a reminder in the moment, in acceptance of the unpleasant, in pursuit of values, in balance, in love with their sport, and in a good sporting environment. I mean, obviously the last one has a real relationship with what we've just been talking about, but the rest feel a little bit more on the individual level. I understand they're on the group and environment level as well, but they feel also a little bit more on the individual level. And that's where your passion for ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, comes in. I'm assuming you weren't always using ACT. You were a little bit more CBT prior to ACT, and perhaps had a couple of poorer experiences with using CBT.
Yeah, that's correct, and I think that's also why we published this second version of the Team Denmark philosophy. Was in order to try and describe that shift in our way of thinking. And for me, it really came about in during the London Olympics, where I was in Weymouth with the Danish sailing team,
Right.
And I think I'd been doing a lot of CBT training with the team in the lead up to that Olympics, and with the individual athletes and little teams of 2 persons, we'd been doing sort of, I'd almost say, the usual stuff, right? We've been sort of trying to get to these thoughts that create too much tension and nervousness. We try and sort of look at those thoughts, collect data that would support them, that would challenge them, question them, in order to create a motivation to make a different thought, So we do it's a cognitive restructuring or rephrasing, find out different thoughts that they could think when those original thoughts came up, and this would all be in neat little schematics, and I think we were extremely well prepared, and we made that work at the European Championships, and we made it work at the World Championships. So I felt that we really had something going there. But then at the Olympics, I remember this particular. It was one crew that where I first realized that there's something that I need to understand better here. And what happened was that even though we spent lots of time trying to, you know, discuss what thoughts are going to come up during the Olympics, we didn't get it right. And there was a lot of other thoughts that came in. And these were, for example, related to the fact that the team was planning perhaps on stopping their careers after the Olympics. They felt that it was a completely different competition for that reason. There was no longer any learning objectives. It was all about performance. There was a lot of things different there that they just didn't, they weren't prepared for that. And they didn't have a metacognitive strategy. I mean, it was too demanding for them to try and look at these thoughts and try and evaluate them and try and find better versions of them and change them and during the Olympics. And it took us a couple of days to understand what was going on. And by then, unfortunately, they started sailing well, but it was too late for reaching what they were hoping for with this particular Olympics. And then I came back to Denmark and we discussed it with my other colleagues, and they all had similar experiences. I remember a good colleague of mine saying that he was in that very same position. He was with an athlete who was a favorite in his event, but he was struggling. He was losing confidence and he was nervous. And my colleague who would say those things like, so how, because he knew that the build-up had been perfect. So how was your last event? Well, I won it. And he would think, great, good on me, man. This is going to build his confidence, right? And so how was your last test? And he would say, well, I just nailed the last test. And he would think, great job there. That's perfect. But there was just not that emotional shift that he wanted to see. He could just see that the athlete could respond with all of this, but it didn't make a difference. So we discussed all these different things and decided we need to try and understand what was going on there. And then we, lucky enough within Team Denmark, we our management was kind enough to support our curiosity there. So we went to France, to INSEP, to meet with some people who work with mindfulness. We went to Colorado Springs, to the Olympic Training Center where we met with Peter Habel, who's been working on ACT and mindfulness for a long time. And we had all these different. We were received very well internationally, and people were curious as to our experiences, and we had these discussion partners, and we just slowly realized that ACT, the acceptance commitment therapy, might be the answer to all the struggles that we'd come across, and so when we came back from that trip, we hosted a summit. We sent an invitation out to people who we knew worked with mindfulness and acceptance approaches. It was not that many at the time, and we were just overwhelmed. So in the end, 48 highly experienced practitioners from all over the world, 17 different countries, they all came to Copenhagen. Nothing was paid for. They all had to pay by themselves, but they just came to learn. So they came and they brought their cases and their ideas and their discussions, and we spent 3 days together. Man, those were, from a professional viewpoint, probably the best 3 days of my life.
That's incredible. What an incredible story. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, tends to be active, or what I would describe as active directive. So I'm challenging the thoughts that pop into my mind, the feelings that I'm experiencing. And you felt that didn't adequately help the athletes who were competing in London 2012. And so yourself and others within Team Denmark who had experienced the same thing with their athletes, the athletes they were working with, went on a mission to look for alternative solutions. You were curious about alternative approaches and ideas. And so ACT was something that you came up with. Tell me about ACT. We've talked about it on a few episodes on the Sports Psych show, but in what way is it different to CBT, and how do you use it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been quite a bit of discussions as to the relationship between CBT and ACT. I mean, obviously, ACT is also a cognitive behavioral approach.
Yes.
So I mean, they're in the same family in a way, and But I think there's some key differences as well, and they're also very, very practical from my viewpoint. And so when you have classic CBT and you have thoughts that are somehow not good for you, they're not good thoughts in a way, they're not functional or they're not positive or whatever. You'll use quite a bit of energy to try and manage those. So the idea is that if you do something actively to have the right thoughts, to have the right emotions, to enter the right performance state, then you can take charge of your mental state and what goes on inside your head, and therefore you can perform well. In ACT, it's we kind of, I think, from my perspective, we recognize that the thoughts have a life of their own. They're really difficult to control. Even when you do sometimes manage to control them, it takes a lot of energy, and that in some ways that energy is misspent in the sense, that you're fighting your own inner thoughts and emotions rather than fighting the opponent, which is who you're going to win against. And then it teaches us that if we can open up to those experiences, if we can be in the very present moment, focus on our performance, and then just have those emotions and thoughts there without necessarily judging if they're good or bad, constructive or not so constructive, whether they're welcome or not, just have them come and go, basically, then we can really direct our attention to what's important in that very moment. I mean, which is the game plan and the values. Maybe we can come back to the values bit, but I mean, who you want to be in that very moment and what you're actually doing. So it's the same basic idea, that thoughts and emotions are something that has an impact on performance. It's what we do about them. It's whether we try and control them or whether we need to accept that they are there and that they have a life of their own, and that we then redirect our attention to the task. So we're trying to change attention more than change thoughts and emotions.
So those first two all-ins, in the moment and in acceptance of the unpleasant, very much revolve around this notion of acceptance. You're suggesting that ultimately, as human beings, we will have thoughts, feelings, emotions. Some of those thoughts, feelings, and emotions will probably, likely be unhelpful. And what I'm hearing you say is actually, by accepting that they're going to come in, by not paying too much attention or any attention to them, which that attention and then that subsequent wrestle against them eats up far too much energy that we can actually be utilizing on our performance. So we want to be, at least initially, accepting that we're going to have these thoughts, and that helps us to play in the moment. Accepting the unpleasant is an absolute crucial part of directing our attention onto the important parts of performance. Am I hearing you correctly there?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, it's when athletes grasp that idea, it's a huge relief for them. So, imagine many of our young athletes, they grow up with role models. I mean, it's slowly changing, luckily, but they grow up with role models who've sort of embodied this idea that they're always confident, that they're never nervous, that that they always sort of in an attack mindset, and then they look at themselves and they think, so what's wrong with me? I've got all kinds of worries and doubts and nervousness and bad thoughts before. Something must be wrong. I don't have performance mentality or whatever it might be, and I need to do something about this. And once they grasp this idea that everybody has a very active mind and a very critical mind, and not always a very helpful mind, then they can really sort of try and understand that that's just part of being an athlete, and then they can redirect their attention to what's very important. So we sometimes use this image of the athlete bus, is what we call it. This is one of the ways that our athletes really get it, you can say. And the idea is that you sort of imagine that you're a bus driver, right? And when you're a bus driver in a public bus, your task is to get from A to B, and along the way there are bus stops, and you stop, and people will go on and off, and these people are then thoughts and emotions, And some of them are, pleasant passengers, and some of them are unpleasant passengers. Some passengers will tell you, well, you're not nearly well enough prepared, and all the others look more ready than you do, or you whatever those passengers might tell you. And then what you want to do as a bus driver, sometimes you want to try and get up and shut the door, or you want to try and tell them that they're wrong. No, it's not right. I've tested well, and I'm ready, and you're not correct, or you want to try and fight with them or counter argue them or all that kind of stuff, which is but then what are you not doing while you're doing that? You're not focusing on driving the bus. So we really try and teach the athletes that they can focus on driving the bus and just be witnessing how passengers get on and off. And sometimes, a passenger will take 2 stops, and sometimes he'll take 5 stops, or she'll take, just a single stop or whatever. But there'll be that constant coming and going of passengers, and you don't need to engage in that flow. You can just sort of sit there behind your steering wheel and watch it happen. You don't need to do it, and that's a big relief for many athletes, as I experience it. You don't need to control your inner life. You just need to focus on driving.
Self-talk is a popular intervention within sports psychology. So from what you're saying, does this mean that you don't in any way utilize the psychological skill of self-talk?
Certainly not in the way that it's most often being used, where we try and teach athletes to say specific things to themselves. I'm much more of a, today, I used to, today I'm much more in line with with the mindfulness idea, that you can just be an observer and not an evaluator of your thoughts. And it's one of the places where I think that you need to commit to an idea as a sports psychologist, because you can't on the one hand say, just notice the thoughts and emotions. They're not that important. You focus on your task, and that. And on the other hand, say here's a list of 5 really good thoughts you can think. That's going to confuse the athlete. So I'm not actually convinced necessarily that one approach is necessarily better than another. I know what works for me and for the athletes that I work with, but I think you need to be fairly consistent, at least with a particular athlete.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously it's called acceptance commitment therapy. So where does the commitment come in, Kristoffer?
Yeah, I think, if you really want to be in that moment and accept something that is truly unpleasant, there has to be a good reason for that. You're not going to accept something unpleasant unless, there's a real bonus to it, And I think the idea here is that athletes need to be in pursuit of their values. So they need to know, what do I want to stand for? Who do I want to be as an athlete? And what do I want my career to be about beyond just medals? I want to, and many athletes, once they get into this notion, they really like it. They really commit to the idea that there's more to their career than just, the results. And they have ideas around being a good teammate or sharing knowledge or being a good role models for younger people. But they also have values related to the performance moment. I want to be courageous. I want to be, whatever that might be, a type of athlete. So they have that quite clear vision, or you can at least help them develop quite a clear vision about who they want to be as athletes. And that is sort of the driver behind it all. That is what should motivate them to accept the unpleasant,
So let's try and create an example here. So Denmark in the Euros went 1-0 up against England. I think it was an incredible free kick. And let's imagine one of the Danish players. You go 1-0 up, and as can happen quite often in team invasion sports and all sports, when something good happens, perhaps the nervous system kicks in. You start to feel a little bit inhibited. Those thoughts, don't mess up now. We're 1-0 up. There's a sort of a feeling of protection. So we're accepting that these thoughts and feelings might happen. Commitment to values. Can you give an example where a Danish player may have gone with values here, and how this would sort of the mechanics of this in this moment?
Absolutely. And I just want to say, that I'm not working with our football team. So I don't know exactly.
And please use your own example.
I think actually it might be easy for me to use an example from sailing then.
Great.
So I'll do that. And so Let's imagine a sailor who's on a starting line. And the starting line in sailing, of course, is invisible. They can't draw a line on the water, right? So it's a line between 2 points, 2 boats typically, and it can be a little bit tricky to see where you are, compared to the line. Sometimes are you under, are you over, how far are you from the line, and so forth. And also the wind is constantly oscillating a little bit. So at one moment there'll be an advantage in one end of the line. The course will simply be shorter from that end, and the next minute it'll be from the other end. And the athletes, they all know this, and they're pretty good at. So at an Olympics, for example, where all the good boats are, there will be a tendency that all the boats will be in one end, the favored end. Being down there is not pleasant. There'll be a lot of shouting, there'll be a lot of noise. People will go, yelling, protest, and, get out of my way, and all that kind of stuff. It can be quite an intense place to be. And so for some athletes, what they do is, without actually ever making the decision, they find themselves down the middle or the other end of the line. So they didn't make a decision to go down there. They just sort of got pushed by the fact that this was really unpleasant to be in. And in order to escape that unpleasantness, they moved down the line. So when I talk to athletes about this, if I come back to ACT, we talk about it like, the problem here is not that it's unpleasant to be up there. The problem is not that in a situation like this, you get the thought, oh, what's going to happen? What if it's going to go wrong? What if I'm going to get stuck? This is not going to work for me. I mean, that's just natural. Anybody would get that in that particular situation because it's a really tough situation. Yeah. The problem is that you move down the line, right? So it's the behavior that's the problem, not the thoughts and the emotions. And so we don't need to necessarily change those thoughts and emotions. We just need to teach you to stay, and win your spot at the line. And that means that if you really have a clear vision of who you want to be, I want to be a courageous sailor in a start situation. That means sticking to my position, fighting for it, not giving away space. And what are your regular passengers on the bus, which might be, I'm never going to make it, the others are probably going to outsmart me, or whatever those thoughts might be. And you're willing to, you see them and you're willing to have them. You're willing to accept that they're there while you're struggling to be courageous, striving to be courageous. Then that is, for me, the recipe to actually managing to stay right there and fighting for your spot on the line.
Courageous to stay, courageous to stick to the line, or stick to the position you're in rather than move.
Absolutely. And I think I also discuss with athletes very often, what is the difference between confidence, which is something we often talk about in sports psychology, on the one hand, and courage on the other. And confidence for athlete means, my thoughts and emotions tell me that nothing is going to go wrong. It's going to be all good. I'm going to make it, so we have all this positive energy around where you are. And that's a very, very rare experience at a high level elite sport, at the Olympics, for example. It's way more often that athletes, experience doubt and worry and nervousness and all that kind of thing once they're there. And so courage for me is the willingness, the ability to actually do what it is you set out to do, even when you face difficult thoughts and emotions. So even if you're nervous, and even if you're worrying and you have doubts about whether you still go for it. So for me, courage is just so much more important in elite sport than confidence, because I believe confidence is a rare guest. And he needs you need to invite him way too often to actually get him to come, and he's not an easy one.
It was a rare guest in my golf game, Christopher, that's for sure. Confidence. Something that really interests me, and I love that notion, that dichotomy between confidence and courage, and seeking courage more so than necessarily confidence, which, as you say, can be a rare beast. Just coming back, and this is just my own personal curiosity, coming back to that notion of, let's say, self-talk, and drawing on your example with the sailing, and aligning with this notion of a commitment in the acceptance commitment therapy. Can't that be where the self-talk comes in as much as your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions want to draw you down to this position that's maladaptive on the boat, that's unhelpful? you want to you want to stay, so behaviorally you want to stay in a position. So I get that it's a behavioral intervention, and I get that you're committing to your value of courage, but in that moment, isn't the athlete, the sailor, actually instructing themselves via self-talk, stay, have courage, stay? Isn't self-talk thrown into the mix there, or am I getting that wrong?
No, I mean you're right. As long as we look at self-talk as those sort of how should I say, sort of instructional types of self-talk. I mean, those are very. Let's say I know. Yeah, again, when I work with the sailor, and they're going upwind for the first beat. There's a lot of things going on, and all of a sudden, a group of sailors, they tack to the other side, perhaps, and you're wondering, should I go, should I not go, and so forth. And if you're stuck in a little bit of a difficult place, the wind is not very good, and what athletes or sailors can tend to do is just focus all their intention into the boat, trying to make it go fast. But if you don't look out, you're going to miss the next puff. You're not going to miss the next little bit of a shift, and whatever. So this is where self-talk does come in. They're going to have for example, one of my sailors got like 3 little cues that they say: look out, which means where do I want to go? Look up, which is into the sail. I mean, do I have the power in the sail that I want to? And then speed, which means basically, push, lean your body out and get the flat boat and go. So they'll have those 3 little things that they'll say to themselves that are very instructional. What I meant before about self-talk was more sort of the kind of self-talk where you say, you are ready, you can do this, you're a winner, whatever. That kind of trying to build confidence kind of self-talk is not something that we use very often. But the small instructional cues we do.
And the motivational piece?
Our athletes are very, very motivated. They need to. That's not an issue, I think. Or maybe in training a few times, but not often.
So let's move on, if we may, to Team Denmark's Sports Psychology Professional Philosophy 2.0, which is a document that we've unpacked a lot of what's in here anyway, but there's a couple of things to unpack with it. So this is a document that you wrote with Diment and Carsten, Hvid, Larsen, your colleagues at Team Denmark. So this is a reboot. This is 2.0, and as you've alluded to already, I think this is the inclusion of the ecological psychology. But can you sort of give us an overarching viewpoint of this document? Anybody can go and read it. So it is literally Team Denmark going, "Hey, everybody around the world, this is what we do here," which, as I said at the beginning, is so generous of you. It's split into various levels. Can you unpack this a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, I can just start by saying that it's one of my personal values that I like to share. I believe that we all grow if we share. I learned something, and I've got so much feedback on this paper, so I've learned a lot through sharing this paper. And I can also just as a small sort of story say that when we did my research on good talent development environments, this was what I met from the coaches. A willingness to share and be open. So I believe, it's a key feature of good environments that we are not trying to keep secrets. Anyways, let me get into it. I read a paper once by Prof Kristoffer about professional philosophy, and I really realized how important that could be for us. So when we came together in Team Denmark in 2008 for the first time, there was a sports psychology team in Team Denmark, 4 people at that time. We decided, and we were allowed to spend the first couple of months trying to discuss what we wanted to do and how we wanted to work. And that's how we came up with the first version of our professional philosophy. So we were not asked to have athletes or have clients in the first, period. We were given time to actually sit down and discuss how we wanted to work. And we've been doing that ever since. We've had ongoing whole days set off, for discussing and adjusting and so forth. What Prof Kristoffer in his original paper, he suggested 5 different levels. We have tweaked them a little bit, and what we have now is sort of first the visions of the team, and then sort of some basic beliefs that govern the way that we work. And the next level is the theories of intervention that we use. And then the 4th level is a model that we designed to sort of illustrate what things are we working on, what is the content of our intervention. And finally, sort of the more specific services. How do we work with individual athletes and teams and so forth? So that's the overall model, so to speak, and the idea here that Arthur formulated in his original paper was that good service requires consistency across all levels. So in that way, I think having a good philosophy helps you be more consistent in the way that you deliver service as a sports psychologist.
At level one, the visions and objective of the sports psychology interventions, you had some big, as they say, big, hairy, audacious goals in there. Exciting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have sort of, I'd almost say the usual ones, right? That Danish elite athletes, they have the right mental skills to perform at the highest level. But we
Yeah.
decided to have some other ones as well. I mean, that we want to create world-class training environments for Danish athletes. And to optimize teamwork and winning cultures at our national teams. This is not necessarily something that coaches and sport managers in the beginning thought was our task. So formulating these visions helped us, to into a discussion around what is actually the role of the sports psychologist. And we also formulated one called, to ensure that athletes experience meaning and value in life as elite athletes. So it's not only about, making sure that they win medals, it's also about having meaningful careers.
One that really hit home for me there is number 4, which was to create a common sports psychology language among professionals, coaches, and athletes across sports, which I agree with and I find fascinating, because I think that it can be language. I think is absolutely vital, and language drives shared mental models. At least that's my opinion, Kristoffer. So I'm thinking shared mental models there. I'm thinking of the importance of a shared language. Equally, I know that having been involved in high performance sport for 25 years, that every athlete is an individual and they have different lenses of the world. And so subsequently a challenge there is when you start to try to, let's call it standardize anything. And I know there would be a great deal of flexibility there, but standardize anything, then often it can lead to an individual sort of saying, well, I don't see it like that, and I like to go about it this way, and that doesn't suit me. And how, I don't know if you've experienced that, but how might you deal with something like that?
Yeah, I think it's not a narrow philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not like that. I mean, there is some flexibility in there. I think what the reason why we say create a common language is that we came from a place where there would be sports psychology interventions there and there, in the environment, but it would be anyone from previous high-level athletes to military people to business consultants coming in, and they would talk about completely different things,
Yeah.
right? So, and that just didn't work, And they would also change. So you'd work a year with one person, and then another person would come in, and they would do a completely different thing, and it would just be confusing for the athletes. So what we wanted to create was sort of the notion that when an athlete meets sports psychology for the first time, when they are 13 years old or 15 years old or whatever. And then they have someone, but then they come into a senior national team and they have one of us. And then one of us maybe gets another job and we get a new person in, and they have to work with someone else. Across from the athlete perspective, the core message is going to be the same. So it's not like someone is going to say, it's really important for you to control your mind. And the next one is saying, you can't control your mind, you need to accept. Or, we need to work also on the environment. And then the next person says, we can't do nothing about the environment. You'll have to learn to just live with that. Right? I mean, those sort of confusing, we wanted to try and get rid of that by having a common philosophy.
Yeah. What do we stand for? What do we do here?
Yeah.
I'd like to finish by honing in on your very brilliant mental wheel. I love it. It's great. Unfortunately, people listening cannot see it right now as they're listening, but they can go online, and I'm sure we'll give links to this document because anybody can read it.
Absolutely.
And I think this is interesting as well, because I do think that sometimes people can listen in to a framework like ACT and think that that's what it is all about, and that there is only that. But your mental will involves mental techniques, mental skills, mental processes. Different sports psychologists will use different terminologies for those things. You've got visualization in there. You've got goal setting in there. Tell me a little bit about this mental will.
Yeah, I think actually the most important part of it is that sort of in the middle of the mental wheel is basically the values, who I want to be as an
Yeah.
athlete. That's sort of the driving force behind sort of the mental wheel. And then we have on the outskirts of it, there's that 3R process. It's called register, release, and refocus. And basically, it is very much what we try and teach the athletes. So when you're in a tough spot somewhere, um, again, you're that footballer that you're leading 1-0, and you're starting to have those thoughts about what if I'm the person who miss and whatever. You need to be able to do those 3 R's. And the first one is register. So if you don't register what's going on inside of you, if you don't even discover that thought, it's already taken hold of you. It has already made you do something that you didn't want, just to get away from that unpleasant feeling. That could be just passing the ball sideways all the time, taking all the difficult bits and pieces out of your games, or what that might be, or you wouldn't make a mess. And so first part is register. Then you need to do something to release from that thought, especially if it's one of those sticky thoughts, oh man, this is going to go wrong, or I'm not going to be able to do this, or, we're probably going to lose and it'll be all my fault. Some of those thoughts can be really sticky. So we try and teach the athletes techniques to accept them, to just, free yourself or disentangle yourself a little bit. And then you refocus to the task and the values. So that is why it's very important to have a clear idea about what is my task today, what are my values, how is it that I want to play my game out there today. And that process can happen every second minute through a game.
Yes.
You realize that there's a different thought intruding. You register it, you release from it, you refocus, and what do you know? A minute later, it happens again. And therefore we try and say that mental work is it's not like a skill. It's a piece of work that you do again and again and again. So it's really quite tough to be mentally strong, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it, and so it's, as you say, in the middle there, it's the values, and then coming out, you've got the 3 R's on the outside, and then you've got some mental techniques more towards the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I can maybe just say that this mental wheel is a small portion of a larger model that says yes, these are the performance bits, but then there's also different other levels, like it's more like sort of grounding levels around self-worth and motives and values, and then the whole environment is also depicted in the model. The fact that you're in a sports federation and in a team, and that those teams will have roles and cultures and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a very comprehensive model, because you've
Yeah.
got the mental wheel that is within a triangle at the top there, and under that, life as an elite athlete and life skills, and then under that, identity and drive, and you've alluded to self-worth and motives and values and
Yeah.
typical
Yeah.
behaviors. And then outside of the triangle, you've got a circle with obviously the experiences that these players have in their everyday life. So it's it covers a lot of ground.
And that's very important, because sometimes when we sit down in the beginning with the athletes, this model will be on the wall in the consultation office. And it's a great starting point, and to help athletes realize that, well, sports psychology is not only about handling high pressure performance situations. It's about my entire life as an athlete, and who I am and who I want to be, and the different environments that I'm in part of. And so while they may come in with a very narrow idea of what it is that we're going to work on, very soon they'll say, well, I think actually for me, we need to look at whatever, like my values or my motives, or something else in the model that they didn't think about, or that they didn't realize could be part of a sports psychology intervention.
I think that demonstrates the value of a model. I mean, it makes me think of that quote that no model is correct, but some are useful.
Yeah.
and this is a really useful one.
Yeah.
But models are conversation starters, aren't they? They aid conversation, they start conversation. They help athletes to recognize the kind of things that they might want to work on.
Exactly.
Kristoffer, I can't thank you enough. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've got plenty more questions, but I do want to respect your time. And I do know that you would have tapped into the interest of the Sports Psych Show audience. I certainly know plenty of people who will want to get hold of this paper, download this paper, which I think they can do online.
Yeah, it's the Scandinavian Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology. It's
Right.
an open access journal,
Yes.
so yeah, they can just go to the webpage and find it.
And the chapter in the book that might be coming out in spring is by Mark Aogi and
Arthur Poksvodowski.
perfect,
Yeah,
brilliant. Look out for that one, and I'll have to grab them onto the Sports Psych Show to have a conversation about that book.
I think you should.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how can people? I know you are on social media. How can people follow you, your work, and get in contact if you'd like them to?
Yeah, I mean, they're more than welcome to contact me via Twitter. I can, when I've been listening to your show, this is what people say, isn't it? I believe it's at Henriksen, maybe. I'm not even sure, but I'm not very great at social media. I've 10 times I've decided now I need to make an effort, to be better at that. But I tend to end up other places anyway. So, but
Well, Christopher, you've got to be all in. You see,
yeah, yeah,
that's the
you have,
seventh one in your all in
yeah,
to social media.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure about the health and safety of that one, by the way.
No, I'm not. But I mean, I do like to interact, so I would welcome any comments and ideas, and I know that other practitioners have used sort of the model and the paper to design their own philosophy as teams, as national teams, so to speak, but also just from persons. And I'd love to hear about experiences with this.
It doesn't surprise me at all. And I'm going to shamelessly steal some stuff from it. So
You're more than welcome.
thank you, thank you. Well, look, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, Christopher.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.